my friends. Hello, my fellow feelers. Um, these last couple of weeks I've been on vacation in Maine, and I had this fantasy that I was going to do this live from, I don't know, the dock at the near the lake where I'm staying in Maine. And I went out there, and the mosquitoes were like the size of seagulls, and I couldn't get the Wi-Fi to work. So I was like, screw it. I'm just going to come back to this. So this is a less picturesque kind of a backdrop here. Here, let me show you the view up the driveway. This is where I'm staying in Maine. That's picturesque, right? Beautiful, tall pine trees. Gorgeous. So as you guys in the group or who are plugged into what I do in this group know, is I usually do a Facebook Live over the weekend. And if you are coming on to watch me on the replay, first of all, if you're watching now live, just give me a little wave or something so that I know you can hear me. I'm always worried about that. And second of all, if you're watching on the replay, just put hashtag replay in the comments here. Oh, Kelly. Hi, Kelly. Kelly, let me know if you can hear me okay. So yeah, good times. So I usually do a Facebook Live on the weekend about a topic, and earlier this week I announced a topic. Hi, Nicole, miss you, baby. And then I didn't get around to actually talking about it. So I'm here today to talk to you about it, and I have a little anecdote about what I've been eating on vacation. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Becky. So I'm going to be sharing that with you at the end of this conversation. But so I just wanted today, my friends, to start to begin to expose the group to ideas that fall under the category of intuitive eating. So intuitive eating is a set of practices and ideas that were evolved by a duo of dietitians named, I don't know how you say her last name, it's Evelyn Tribole, Tribole, and her partner Elise something or other. I don't even know what her last name is, so that tells you how much I prepared for this live today. Anyway, these two dietitians, after many years of experience, evolved this approach to food that they came to call intuitive eating, and they wrote a book about it in the 90s, actually. And then with the rise of social media in the aughts, they found that a lot of their ideas were actually being passed around on like Instagram, that even though their book, I don't know how much success their book enjoyed, but these days the concepts that they started to share, the concepts that they came up with and that they started to share have really started to gain some traction now. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing today. I'm going to save that for a different time when I've prepped more. Frankly, there's 10 different practices or observances that they inspire you to do. Oh my God, by calling them observances, it sounds like it's a yoga thing. It's not, it's different than that. But there are these 10 different practices that they encourage you to do around food, etc. And I have been working on this myself for probably about 18 months. I've been working on this set of practices. So I'm not going to talk about that exclusively today, but I did want to talk to you about something. This is what I've been planning to talk to you about for the last week and a half. I want to talk to you guys about what I've been thinking about in my head as conscious uncoupling. Conscious uncoupling. So we all know what conscious uncoupling is probably, or maybe you don't read Us magazine like I do and you don't know, but several years ago when Gwyneth Paltrow and her husband Chris Martin split up, she had this thing where she referred to what they were doing as conscious uncoupling, right? So the type of conscious uncoupling that I'm thinking about has nothing to do with that. It has to do with how certain ideas that we have about our bodies and about ourselves are unconsciously coupled. We have certain ideas, certain concepts coupled together, tied together very tightly, both in our culture and in a lot of cases we have a couple of concepts tied together in a really tight way in our minds and hearts that we're not even that conscious of. And if you've heard me talk before, if you've heard me do my lives before, you know that one of the things that is a passion of mine is seeing how the ways that we treat our bodies around specifically movement and food and self-love reflect larger culture, like larger things that are happening in our culture. And that specific, oopsie, hopefully it's still working. I made a big list for us of things that are coupled together that I would like to encourage us to consciously uncouple. Okay, so here's one that I talked about when I mentioned earlier in my Facebook Live on my personal page what this week's conversation was going to be about in all the feels. Movement and exercise. Movement and exercise. So some of you who have worked with me more extensively, or maybe you've watched some of my lives before, you've heard me talk about a Venn diagram of movement and how the Venn diagram of human movement is so enormously large. And it includes all kinds of cool things like the muscles of your arms that make or on your body that give you goosebumps, that make your hairs stand up, and running, of course, and walking and dancing and having a bowel movement and making love and having a baby and whatever the hell it is that your spleen does, and climbing a tree. All of these are within the realm of human movement, right? And then exercise is this teeny tiny little subset, this teeny tiny little circle, this subset of movement, right? But a lot of us have exercise and movement conflated. We have exercise and movement unconsciously coupled. I love to exercise. I have a trainer. I work out with her twice a week. She's in this group. So I'm not anti-exercise, but I do, with my long history of teaching people about movement, I have found that I believe that you will increase your happiness and your health and your self-love if you work on expanding your idea of movement beyond just exercise, right? So like when I think about movement, I'm thinking about taking like beyond the stuff that I do at the gym with the trainer, right? Not that I go to the gym these days, but movement includes the practice I have of sitting on the floor whenever I can, the practice I have of squatting when I can. My movement practice includes the type of shoes that I wear on my feet and the types of clothes that I wear. A movement practice includes hugging my mom and hugging my husband. My movement practice includes a whole bunch of things that are way beyond just the 2 hours a week that I spend with my trainer. And my big hope for all of us is that we can expand the lens of the types of movements that we allow ourselves, instead of thinking, okay, well, instead of thinking of movement as being just a thing that you take care of in those 2 hours or 1 hour a week at the gym or what have you, instead make it bigger, right? What are all the different ways that you can move in your regular life? So that's one thing I encourage you to consciously uncouple. Here's a big one now that I encourage you to consciously uncouple. Exercise and weight loss. Exercise and weight loss. So some of you have heard me talk before about diet culture. I'm going to go more in depth about that on a different live. But even for myself, who went to a feminist women's college and was raised by a feminist mom who is a doctor, even I, who was raised with these concepts, like every day of my freaking life, I heard about sexism, have had such a rude awakening, even these last couple of years, about how profoundly our attitudes about our bodies are influenced by what we call diet culture, are influenced by the feeling that thinner is better, that thinner is healthier, right? And so consequently, one of the couplings that we have inside our minds and hearts, one of the unconscious couplings that we have, is this thing where we associate exercise with weight loss. Now, you individually may or may not have any one of these things hooked up inside your brain, right? But a lot of people have this, and our larger culture tends to think of exercise as something that you do to help yourself lose weight, right? So now you've got a situation, because exercise is coupled with movement, because movement is coupled with exercise and exercise is coupled with weight loss. Now you've got a thing where where people tend to start to think that like movement is something that you only do as a punishment to help yourself lose weight, to make yourself lose weight. And that is profoundly tragic, because movement doesn't have to be a punishment for having eaten something. Today I ate a ho-ho. I'll tell you more about that in just a minute. Movement is your birthright, and it is such a pleasure. It can be such a pleasure, such a joy to move. It can be such a pleasure and a joy to rest, right? So I encourage us all to start to separate out exercise from weight loss. Uncouple that shit, okay? Moving, you don't just have to move to lose weight. Okay, so I talked about exercise and weight loss. I kind of talked about movement and weight loss. Here's one that's coupled a lot: health and happiness. Health and happiness. So this is a profoundly ableist coupling, right? It's the idea that people who are unhealthy are by definition unhappy, that you can't be somebody with health problems and be happy. Or this is actually the really shitty way it shows up, that if you have health problems, that you are somehow undeserving of happiness, that you are certainly undeserving of respect. Yeah. So the thing I was particularly thinking about when I wrote this one was I was thinking about this profound attitude that we have in our culture that fat people can't be healthy, right? Because that's an unconscious coupling that we have, that healthy equals thin, and that you can't be a fat person and be healthy. And certainly there's an attitude in our culture that you cannot be that if you are a fat person, that you do not deserve to be happy. That your happiness needs to wait until you've gotten thin again. But if you even pull the camera further back than that, not only does our culture tend to act that way about fat people, and when I use the word fat, I'm using it in the sense that it is used by body positive activists who are reclaiming the word fat, right? So I'm using it purely as a descriptor, not as a denigrating word, right? Some people have thin bodies, some people have fat bodies. All bodies are beautiful and worthy of respect. And all bodies are capable of happiness. Yeah. But if you pull the camera way back, our culture even has a ton of stuff around people, not necessarily people that are fat, which is not a disability, right? But people who are differently abled in any way do not deserve happiness or do not deserve respect, right? So that's another thing I think we should consciously uncouple, is health and happiness. You can be a profoundly sick person and be happy, right? Thinness and health. I kind of talked about this one. Hi, Jessie. I kind of talked about this one, how we tend to, in our culture, think that if you are fat, that you cannot be healthy. You cannot be a fat person and be healthy. That, in fact, only thin people can be healthy. When the truth is that you could be a thin person and be profoundly unhealthy. That you could be a fat person and be healthy. Shockaroo! Amazing! Here's another thing we have conflated, right? That we have unconsciously coupled, that I think we should uncouple. Weight loss and health. Weight loss and health. So some of you may know this, some of you may not know this. There is an enormous, horrible system of discrimination in our culture's medical system against fat people. So often, if a fat person goes to the doctor and say they're coming in for knee pain, the first thing the doctor will tell them is, well, you need to lose weight. Before they'll even before they'll even talk about any of the other factors that are at play in that person's case, oftentimes the first thing they'll talk about is the person's weight. I'm going to talk about this in more detail in a future live, but the standard that many doctors use to decide whether somebody weighs too much or not is something called the BMI, the Body Mass Index, which is a system of measurement or evaluation that is infamously sexist and racist. So there is this attitude in our culture that you have to be thin in order to be healthy. And that is bullshit. Let's uncouple it. Screw that. Okay, so weight loss and health and worth, right? That goes back to this ableist thing that I was talking about, right? Where the idea is that if you're not a healthy person, you have no value, right? That's a thing that happens in that's an attitude that our culture has. Thinness and worth, only thin people have value. There's also a thing where value and youth, right? Only thin young people have value. Okay, here's something that's unconsciously coupled that I would love for us to uncouple. Pleasure and sin. Pleasure and sin. I talked about this a little bit in the 7 Deadly Sins live that I did a couple of weeks ago, right? But there is this cultural mindset where if you're enjoying something, that there is something sinful about it, right? My friend Natalie and I were just talking about how there are a number of things where our culture simultaneously pushes certain things onto us, like pushes things up in our face, tells us we should want these things, and then tells us that there's something wrong with wanting those things, right? And guess what? There are all these really big concepts, like, for example, sex, like symbols of sexuality are everywhere. Our culture simultaneously is constantly putting sex in front of our faces, but then at the same time telling us that we're wrong to want sex. It's the same thing with food, right? All this like constant bombardment of media about food, but at the same time you're wrong to actually want it or eat that, right? Sexuality, food, money. Yeah, our culture is like money, 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 but at the same time you shouldn't want it. That's greedy, right? I've mentioned sleep, right? Or rest is also a thing where our culture is constantly showing us pictures of people at leisure and at the same time telling us that we're wrong for wanting more leisure. Okay, so pleasure and sin. Let's uncouple those things. How about this? Food and naughtiness. Yeah, Leslie writes, no, you can't want sex, but you must provide it, right? That's the attitude in our culture. Hi, Leslie. I'm so glad to see you here. Food and naughtiness. That's something, those are two concepts that are unfortunately so profoundly coupled in our collective minds, right? Like this, earlier this week, I went to a party and it was one of those things where, so it was a very small party and it was outside and social distancing was observed and what have you. But it was amazing how, so out come some hors d'oeuvres and there's some apple cake and here's all these folks standing around talking about how it's super naughty that they want to eat the apple cake and whether or not they're going to eat it. And if they don't eat that, then they're being good. And if they do eat it, then they're being bad, right? So there's all of this, like food and naughtiness are all tied up together. I don't think that's serving anybody. How about this? Deprivation and virtue. We've got those things all tied up together. Deprivation and virtue. Thinness and self-control or discipline. We've got those things kind of tied up together. Kelly says, oh my God, this is making me shouty. Food and naughtiness. I hate this. Food as a guilty pleasure. Having to explain why you eat something. Yeah. There is so much judgment around food, guys. And I'm a woman who, I fit into what's called, what in the fat activist realm, they call them straight sizes. So sizes usually up to about a size 14. They think of those as straight sizes. They're sizes that you could generally find in a store. So I'm a woman that's worn straight sizes more or less my whole life. But I am also aware as a woman living in this culture how people freaking are constantly monitoring what women eat. Constantly monitoring what other women eat. It's interesting. Have you ever had somebody comment on what you've got in your grocery cart? That's a kick, right? Okay. Deprivation and virtue. The idea that if you deprive yourself of pleasure, that you're virtuous, right? Yeah, fuck deprivation. Okay. Another thing we have unconsciously coupled that I think we should consciously uncouple is thinness. God damn it, the mosquitoes here are like, they're like so big, they're the size of flies. Thinness and self-control. We've got that hooked up. Restriction and virtue. A lot of these end up saying the same thing, right? I think you know what I'm saying here. How about this? Thinness and worthiness of self-love. Thinness and worthiness to love yourself. A lot of us have this idea that, and a lot of times it's unspoken, guys. It's not like we're walking around saying things to ourselves or writing ourselves little notes on Post-its that say, Sally must lose 10 pounds to be worthy of self-love, right? But a lot of us deep down inside have this feeling that we're not worthy of loving ourselves until we lose weight. We're not worthy of loving ourselves until we lose weight. That is fucked, my friends. Dislike. Okay, I want you to love yourself no matter what. How about this? Thinness and sexiness. We have that conflated. Becky says, when you first said food and naughtiness, I could only picture the scene in Bridesmaids with hoagies. Yeah. So my husband and I saw that film Bridesmaids, and I love that actress, Melissa McCarthy. I freaking love her. But there's a fair amount of stuff that goes on in her movies that kind of makes me uncomfortable. Like sometimes I'm like, is this a movie that's laughing with fat people or at fat people, right? It's a fine line, right? And I'm not saying I have the answer to that question. I freaking laughed my ass off at that movie. You know what movie I really liked that she's in? The one called Spy. Love that movie. But again, I was kind of like, I'm enjoying this. I'm laughing at this. But is it laughing with fat people or at fat people? I don't have the answer. Okay, thinness and sexiness. Can fat people be sexy, my friends? If you think of yourself as fat, can you be sexy? Are you hot if you're fat? Yeah. I think fat people can be hot, right? Okay, thinness and happiness. How about all the stuff that we have around? Hell yes. How about all that stuff we have around about how we're not going to be happy until we're thin, right? We're going to wait to be happy until we're thin. Again, it's an unconscious coupling that I want to break that shit down. In general, appearance and worthiness tend to be coupled, right? Here I'm thinking of that thing that, have you ever been in some kind of a social situation where somebody says approvingly of a woman, usually it's of a woman, oh, she really takes good care of herself, right? She really takes good care of herself. Now, I am totally, totally in favor of women taking care of themselves in any ways that they want. I am in favor of women resting more and orgasming more and eating what they want to eat in a way that makes them feel full and nourished and joyful and moving in ways that make them feel good. I am in favor of women caring for themselves, right? But don't you find that with that phrase, oh, she really takes care of herself, there's this thing about it that has to do with weight, right? Fuck that. That's what I have to say about it. Okay, so that's a big list of things that I think we should consciously uncouple, that we should rip that shit apart, right? We should start to separate those things out, okay? So then I was like, well, let me not leave this on a down note with them. So then I made a list of things we should couple instead or work on coupling instead. Yeah, Kelly's saying yeah, or yeah, in a reference to body size where a woman keeps herself that way, right? Fuck that. Okay, things to couple instead. How about food and pleasure? Yeah, let's hook those things up together. Food and pleasure, pure pleasure. Okay, so this is a good time to tell you about the ho-ho. So as part of my intuitive eating practice, I've been working on this for probably like 18 months, guys. And one aspect of this practice is that you allow yourself to begin to eat formerly forbidden foods. And I was never a big quote unquote dieter to lose weight, but I have had for probably 20 years, very elaborate sets of food rules about what I allowed myself to eat and what I didn't allow. For a long time, I didn't allow myself to eat carbs. I was very picky about not allowing myself to eat quote unquote processed food. And over the last 18 months, like when I first started, there was a period of time where I was eating a lot of stuff that I knew that I had restricted myself from for years, like bread and dairy. But what's so crazy is that I keep trying to kind of like empty the bag out of formerly forbidden foods, and I keep finding there's still shit left in the bag that I haven't allowed myself to eat. So this week, actually on vacation, I have eaten 3 things that I formerly did not allow myself to eat. And if this is triggering for you, this type of talk, I'm sorry. Please feel free to jump off, obviously. But one of the things, and also it's deeply boring, right? Conversations about other people's food rules can get really freaking dull. Like if you've ever had to be in a conversation with somebody about their elaborate set of food rules, it's just mind-numbingly dull. I feel sorry for all the people I've had to listen to my conversations about that for 20 years. But so the 3 things were Cold cereal. Believe it or not, that was in my bag of things I did not allow myself to eat. Processed peanut butter, right? Like Jif. Didn't allow myself to eat that for 20 years. And ho-hos. You guys know what ho-hos are? Little Debbie, I think it's not little, I think it's Hostess, right? Any type of Hostess cake. So I'm on this island in Maine where the Wi-Fi is bad and the mosquitoes are enormous. And I go to the little island grocery store or what have you. And I noticed that they have ho-hos there. And I had actually already, like in this practice of dumping the bag and allowing myself to eat a bunch of forbidden foods, I have had ho-hos on my mind for about like a week or like maybe even longer, like a month. I've been like, I don't know, like ho-hos don't cross my path that much. But if I see a ho-ho, I'm going to get it and I'm going to eat a ho-ho. And so you know how this story is going to turn out. I'm at the little grocery store. They have all these Hostess cakes there. I'm like, ooh, ho-hos. I get the ho-hos, and I eat the ho-ho. It's disgusting. It was gross. Not that you should think it's gross, right? I'm not saying that ho-hos are gross for you. Eat the ho-hos, right? My husband loves ho-hos. Eat ho-hos all day long if they give you pleasure. Even if they don't give you, eat what you want, right? Uncouple food from naughtiness. Uncouple this shit. That's where I'm going. That's the practice I'm working on in my life. But it was disgusting to me. I'm like, this is not good. I couldn't eat the whole thing. It's this big. It's like, it's not that big. I couldn't even eat it, which was funny. So that was amazing. The cold cereal, by the way, was pretty good. I'd have that again. The processed peanut butter was amazing, and I will totally be having that again. Right? So that was just fascinating. Anyway, all of which to say, these are things that I feel that we could couple instead. Food and pleasure. Let's hook that shit up. Food and pleasure. Eating should be pleasurable. Movement and pleasure. And this stuff, guys, this is like my life's work. Movement and pleasure. Moving in a way that feels good. Like allowing yourself to delight in the way that your body has evolved to move. Here's one. Food and sexiness. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're, eating raspberries off your loved one's toes. I don't know. That's just the first thing I could think of, right? But I mean, isn't there a thing where like, is a chubby woman eating a big hoagie, is that sexy? What if we coupled that up? What if it is? Yeah. If you are, I don't know, what would it be like if eating a big hoagie was hot? If you found that sexy about yourself, eating a hoagie. How about, here's something to hook up, health and connection with others. The hoagies come to mind again, yes. Health and feeling yourself. Like feeling, like just being present in your body, right? That's what this group, All the Feels, is all about. What if feeling your feelings, feeling the pleasure in food, like taking pleasure in movement. What if feeling yourself, feeling things was hooked up for you with health, right? Because I believe it is. Fatness and sexiness. We talked about this one, right? Can a fat person be sexy? I fucking think they can. Okay. How about fatness and worthiness? Can a fat person be a valuable person? I think they fucking can. Virtue with self-compassion. Let's hook those things up together, right? Virtue and self-compassion. Yeah. How about discipline and self-love? So discipline shares the same verbal root. Anybody who's ever done a yoga class, taken a yoga class knows this, right? That discipline has the same root as disciple, right? So what if you hooked up discipline with self-love? So the idea is like, okay, I'm going to be as disciplined as I can be about loving myself. That makes discipline sound way more like fun and cool, right? Way more joyful. How about this one, okay? I have this in all caps. Pleasure and worthiness. How about hooking up pleasure and worthiness, right? When I do things that give me pleasure, I affirm my worthiness. I affirm that I matter. I affirm that I have value when I allow myself to experience pleasure. How about fatness and virtue? Right? Total self-study. Yeah, Leslie, right? How about fatness and virtue, right? Those two things are so rarely hooked up in our culture. What would it be like to associate fatness with virtue? To say, to like, one thing I will tell you generally, people that are fat are navigating such incredible societal oppression on levels that those of us that wear straight sizes do not have it, can barely begin to comprehend, right? It's an overwhelming level of oppression. Okay, and then here's my last one on this little list: pleasure and liberation. Pleasure and liberation. What happens if you hooked up? What would it be like to hook up pleasure, your joy in yourself, joy in moving, joy in your meals, eating until you're satiated, right? What would it be like to hook up your personal pleasure with liberation, right? With pushing back against those big oppressive forces in our society that tell us that women are inferior to men, that black people or people of color are inferior to white people, that indigenous people matter less than colonizers, that trans people, that there's something wrong with them, that their bodies don't deserve to exist. Taking pleasure in yourself is one way. Yeah, pleasurable eating and health. I love that, Jillian. Taking pleasure in yourself is tied up with liberation, with pushing back against these big forces. You see, those big forces don't want you to love yourself. And here's a dirty little secret about those big forces. Even the dudes at the top of that food chain, right? The rich, white, heterosexual men. Those oppressive forces hate those guys too. Like, oppression is just, it's shitty for everybody, right? So Jillian's suggesting that I think what she means is let's consciously couple pleasurable eating and health. Yeah. What would that be like? To be like, yeah, I take pleasure in this ho-ho. I'm going to eat this. I'm going to allow myself the pleasure of eating this ho-ho. And that's actually probably going to be good for me, right? When I was a kid, I spent a year abroad in France, and I lived with this great French family. They were lovely. And they had the way that they handled food at their house was that the house was full of food all the time. Anybody could go and get food whenever they wanted it, anything they felt like. That was different than the way that I grew up. And my French father was this freaking adorable, 4'9" Frenchman, Breton Frenchman, and with just a sparkle in his eye, very light on his feet. And I used to find him taking chocolate from the pantry, and he would say to me as he popped it into his mouth, "Oh, bon pour la santé, bon pour la morale," which means good for your health, good for your spirit, right? Yeah, I love that. So there you go, guys. That's the end of my list. Thank you for watching. This was super fun. So we're trying to uncouple those unconscious couplings that we have and create some new couplings that affirm us as people, that affirm our value, that affirm our human dignity and our God-given right, or our evolutionary right to feel ourselves and feel good in our bodies. So I hope that you will I don't know, have a cupcake or a ho-ho and think of me. I'll see you later. Bye.